Okay, so we're recording, folks, so please use very clean language as we proceed with today's discussion. Good morning for some folks, good afternoon for others. Thank you, Claire, for the introduction. I also want to thank Peak Grant Making for what is really sort of a great partnership that we're developing. So as Claire said, my name is Anthony Simmons, or Tony Simmons. I'm the Senior Director of Institutional Partnerships with a focus on equity here at Resilia. I'll get into a little bit more about my background in the moment, and certainly we'll introduce my colleagues at the Fairfield Community Foundation, Health Forward, and the Boston Foundation in just a moment. But I want to give folks a good overview of why we're here today and certainly sort of the purpose for today's conversation. 21 funders across the United States have joined Elevate, a learning and action network, which is dedicated to strengthening historically marginalized communities through trust-based capacity building and equity-centric data sharing. Led by Resilia, our Black women-led social impact organization, Elevate leverages the power of the collective to amplify the capacity and, more importantly, the voices of BIPOC-led and serving grassroots organizations. Today's conversation will explore how funders are deploying trust-based capacity building strategies with Resilia's customized support, which responds to the mission-facing and back office needs of nonprofits by meeting them exactly where they are. After our panelist discussion, I want to invite all of you to begin to reimagine a further new dynamic of how we can provide capacity building, which drives equitable outcomes in which our BIPOC-led and serving change makers build agency in their communities. So with that, I want to take a moment to introduce our very prestigious panel. And first, Don, if we can advance the slide a little bit. Yeah, don't worry about me. I know exactly who I am, so that's fine. But first, I want to introduce LaTanya, our colleague up in Connecticut. Good afternoon, LaTanya.
Hi, Tony. Thank you for having me. I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Ossipee, New York, the land of the Lenape and Schaghticoke and Wapanger's nations. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about our experience with Resilia.
Great. Thank you, LaTanya. Before I shift over to Lee, I'm going to ask everyone if within the Zoom chat, if you could tell us what city you're in and what communities that you are serving. So please let us know what city you are in and the communities that you are serving. Thank you. With that, our good friend Lee up in Boston. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Tony. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lee Hanchu, she, her pronouns. I'm joining you all from the Boston Foundation today, where I manage our nonprofit sector infrastructure strategy, partnering with sector intermediaries to equip leaders with resources and support to build inclusive and effective organizations. And really excited to learn from participants in the audience today and learn from my esteemed fellow panelists here. Thank you. And I am actually, I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the land of the Pawtucket, Massachusetts, and Namquiche people. Thank you.
Great. And Jason.
All right, Jason Williams. I am here from Kansas City, Missouri. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the land of the Kickapoo, Kaw, and the Osage. I am the Principal Impact Strategist at the Health Forward Foundation, again in Kansas City, Missouri. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And folks, if you are not familiar with the land acknowledgement, let me just sort of lay this out for you. As part of our commitment to creating equitable spaces that recognize the identities of all of us, we want to often acknowledge the lands of the indigenous people where we live. And so with that, I can tell you that here, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, I actually live on the Canarsie Lenape land here in Brooklyn. And so again, it's critically important that, history really should be guiding a lot of how we think and certainly how we do. And so this is just an opportunity for us to just acknowledge the places where we live. Thank you, everyone. So why are we here? A couple of data points I want to share with you. One you can see up on the screen. This comes from the Bridgeband report back in 2020. And folks may already know this data point, but it's critically important that we constantly sort of put it out there. But only 10% of our philanthropic giving currently goes towards leaders of color. BIPOC-led nonprofits win less grant money with more strings attached, receiving an average of 24% lower revenues and having access to 76% less unrestricted assets. I'll also note too, and this is data that comes out of a report that Association of Black Foundation Executives, or APFE, former home, put out a couple of years ago, that when we think about the folks who really do great work, these change makers within our communities, often these are very small nonprofits, right? A data point from APFE, around 80% of the nonprofits that they surveyed around a couple of years ago, 80% of them have less than 10 people on staff, right? So think about all of sort of, the capacity and infrastructure challenges that a small organization will have, and we'll certainly dive into that because many of the funders that we're talking with have small organizations like that. Next slide. And tying our work certainly into the work of Peak, I want to sort of lift a couple of points, and this comes from Peak's principles around sort of grant making. So one, tying practice to values. Number two, narrowing the power gap between grant makers and grant seekers. Driving equity by building grant-making practices and policies that minimize bias and support decisions that promote justice, inclusion, and equity. Responsible stewardship, right? So by managing all entrusted resources, whether it's people, finances, reputation, and time, which care to balance stewardship with an agile approach to risk. Risk aversion sits prominently in philanthropy, and I think we all know that, right? And lastly, evolve in learning by contributing to building sector-wide knowledge and seek wisdom from others, pursuing change and impact. And when we think about the work here at Resilia, just a couple of things I want to share with you. One, our work really seeks to meet change makers exactly where they are. So we have multiple entry points, right, for everyone who's on staff. Trust-based philanthropy principles, right? Long-term capacity support, elevating stories which can drive advocacy efforts, and most importantly, prioritizing those that have been historically marginalized in American history. Next slide. So we'll sort of elevate will be centered across the conversation, but really just to let you know that this is our sort of National Funder Learning and Action Network, right? And so we're bringing together all of our funder partners to explore practice, policy, what can be changed, right? But I think more importantly, as a collective, right? How can we advance the work of equity across the sector? A few of the components, right? Quarterly professional development sessions. So I know Tanya, Lee, and Jason have participated and have actually been great, certainly in this space. Lee, when I think about it, the issue of demographic data, right, is one of those things that's certainly come up. I could just let folks that within our last session, only a couple of weeks ago, we focused on capacity building specifically for grassroots organizations. Another component too is this mentorship space that's been created, right? So folks that may be farther along their journey, right, can actually provide guidance, know-how, frankly, can even talk about the landmines that exist with this work, but folks who are just beginning to do this work. Data and insights. We are a technology company, right? And so we actually produce an amazing amount of not just quantitative data, but also qualitative data coming from the nonprofits. But we also seek you for your own data, right? And so our conversations really do bring in that data, right? So that way we can actually have informed conversations and develop strategies accordingly. And the last, and certainly not least, and again, Lee, I want to tip my hat off for you around regular resource sharing, right? There is a recognition from all of us, I still call myself a recovering program officer, that you were in so many different conversations, right? That certainly drive this work. And I think oftentimes I've heard this from folks that it could feel like you might be a little lost in the forest, right? That you might go to one conference and go through one learning series. And the question often is, what does this all mean collectively, right? And so we spend an amazing amount of time working with our funder partners to make sense of the other learnings that are happening, to be able to bring that in, right? Nothing really should be siloed, right? That this really is sort of the culmination and bringing together a lot of the learnings that everyone is doing. I think more importantly, you all have lessons that you've learned that are critically important to share out as well. So that's really sort of at the heart of Elevate. It's a community. It's a community of practice, and it's a learning and action network. So we want to open this up to our august panelists. And few questions that I will toss to Lee, Latanya, and Jason. The first one, actually, I want to sort of shift over to Latanya and Jason with this first question. If you can tell us what are the current capacity building challenges for the BIPOC-led and serving organizations and grassroots organizations in your community, right? What are some of the challenges that they're actually sort of going through to be able to do their work well? And I guess first, open it up to Latanya.
I think there are a couple of things. Primarily is fundraising, because they need resources to do the work. And you gave the data point regarding giving to BIPOC-led organizations, and part of that is their ability to get in the room where there's wealth. The other is the capacity to do strategic planning. They often are very lean. So you have executives who are also program people in a lot of ways and doing many other things. So sort of taking the time to reflect and be strategic in their planning can be a challenge. Excuse me. And just the back office support. Again, they're very lean, and the ability to sort of have these built out development teams and marketing teams and finance teams can be a big challenge. As a person who led an organization, I can say to you that having your finance person be your HR person and all of the other things that are necessary can prove very challenging, especially if you are experiencing growth as we were. And you're growing because you're having to serve more people and you're getting more grant funds, but those grant funds are program specific.
Yeah. Latanya, thank you for bringing the word lean. And I was going to figure out who's going to be the first person to actually bring the word lean in. And it's a euphemistic term, certainly, but thank you, Latanya. Jason, it's just moving over to you. What do can you talk about some of the challenges that your nonprofit partners are experiencing? And I'm curious if they're similar to what we're hearing from Latanya and her folks too.
Yeah, very similar. In a timely conversation, we just yesterday convened our Resilia cohort for a conversation about capacity building needs and the platform and some of that work. And by and large, cohort very excited about the opportunity that's available to build capacity through this platform. At the same time, some of what we heard is that we don't have the capacity to build capacity. There's just not enough time to sit down and go through a strategic planning process or a budget process and some of those different things that we try to make available through capacity building. But some of what those organizations need is just access to a diversified funding stream. One organization in particular yesterday asked us as a philanthropic organization to do a speed dating type event with other philanthropic organizations so that they can meet other funders here locally. And we had to just raise our hands and say, we don't do a very good job talking to each other. So it's not as easy as it might sound to introduce to other funders so that organizations can work to diversify those funding streams. So we see a lot of challenges related to access to diverse capital in terms of growing those organizations, and then just the time and capacity that's necessary to even build capacity to get on a platform and do the work, or to go through a coaching session, or to do some strategic planning. That in itself takes time, where some of those BIPOC organizations at the grassroots level in particular just don't have time to engage. We'll talk later about how we as a foundation are responding to that in creative ways, but that's some of the challenges that we've seen. Very similar.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. There's something that you just said too around sort of, I need capacity in order to build capacity. Right. And I've similar folks on my team, I've got this whole analogy of, that I need ID in order to get ID, right? For it. Lee, want to sort of shift over to you and actually just pick up where Jason left off, right? And this is, what are your nonprofit partners telling you that they need?
Yeah, so building upon what Jason just said, I would say that what we've heard most is certainly around the board governance and board management. We've definitely seen an uptick in requests around fundraising, building donor stewardship programs, and certainly seen an uptick in wanting to engage with storytelling more and marketing. But I think kind of backing up from that a little bit, what I'm also hearing from organizations and leaders about kind of why those core things keep coming up over and over again is something that Tony, you talked about from the beginning, was given the long-standing disinvestment, the active marginalization of smaller organizations, BIPOC-led organizations, where for many years receiving kind of small project grants, right? In the past couple of years, seeing some funders kind of shift, start to do some repair work and actually provide those multi-year general operating support grants. That's good. There's more work to do, but seeing some of that movement, that's resulting in organizations having to scramble and really build out teams, reorient staff in different ways, think about their board structure, and in ways they have had to before. And a particular example that kind of I keeps coming up as I'm speaking to partners is kind of the need for an audit. You know, organizations perhaps saw an influx of larger grants for the first time and are kind of faced with having to complete an audit. And so that building out an audit committee, for example. So it's really like bringing up a lot of new organizations and it's, new conversations. But seeing those three themes around board governance, fundraising, and kind of that storytelling really rise to the top as kind of part of that system.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. I think that's a really important point that you're making, that if a nonprofit that has just historically been really small, lean, all of a sudden has a windfall, right? Let's say I refer to it as pennies from McKinsey. Right. So when funding like that comes in, or I can recall a number of years ago, following the hurricane in Puerto Rico, the Hispanic Federation received a tremendous amount of money immediately and really did not have the infrastructure, right, to sort of move forward with that. Thank you, Lee, for bringing that up, because I think that's one of the things that I think we sort of certainly gloss over is, we're constantly encouraging them to, raise more funds. Well, when it happens, are they prepared to actually receive all of that as well? Thank you. So let me see, I want to shift back over to then Jason. Given this, and you sort of alluded to this before, how are you and the foundation responding to the capacity needs of the nonprofits that you serve?
Yeah, we, great point from Lee. We heard some of those same needs in alignment with what we are continuing to hear. A lot of the capacity building needs is centered around fiscal management and flexible funding. And again, just that access to resources. But Resilia was actually our first launch into responding to some of the capacity building needs of some of the organizations that we heard from, and some of the quotes that I kind of wrote down from yesterday's session in terms of how that's been helpful in responding to organizations is that it's a use at your own pace platform. And one organization in particular required or asked that all new board members attend a coaching session specifically around how they can think about the work differently than they have in the past. So when you think about board development and what that could look like, as opposed to a one-off webinar, we have this platform that can potentially offer unlimited coaching sessions to board members about how they might think differently and how they might think more creatively about the work and what that could look like. Some of the more technical things that we've moved to are 6-month reports. So typically our grants are 12 months. And instead of doing an interim report on paper at the 6-month period, it's a check-in with the impact strategist, which is formerly program officers for us. We now call them impact strategists. But that check-in is the impact strategist going out and meeting with that organization about where they are and what they need, just identifying that our grant process in terms of applying for a grant for our foundation, when we mapped it out, could take anywhere between 30 and 40 hours, and how burdensome that could be for the organization. We looked at how we could scale down that process to get what we needed on the front end and use more relationship-based grant making to make those grants and to get those reporting requirements that we'd like to see in terms of how we're moving the needle. And most importantly to all of that, I would say responding by redistributing power to those who are doing the work. A community advisory team or committee that can help inform what those organizations need and help share with the foundation how community or what community needs in terms of driving the work forward, instead of a more prescriptive approach where we put out an RFP and just expect that those will respond without any community engagement.
Thank you, Jason. When I think about sort of living and leaning into trust-based principles, you just outlined many of those practices. LaTanya, I know from our previous conversations, I think there's some similarity, and particularly sort of around the advisory council, but can you talk around sort of the work that you and the Community Foundation in Fairfield County, like how are you addressing the capacity needs of your nonprofits?
So very similar to what Jason described, certainly connecting them and providing Resilia as a resource. I've gotten almost identical feedback that Jason just described from some of our members, participants who are using the Resilia platform. We have this in-house institution, if you will, that we call the Center for Nonprofit Education, that about a year and a half ago, we did a pretty extensive survey and focus groups with our BIPOC-led grantee partners, and they essentially told us what they needed from us. And we've created a leaders of color cohort that has allowed them to sort of come together, hear from experts in the field, share successes and challenges, but really created a space for them for the CEOs themselves for their own development, because that was certainly one of the things that we heard, that they make a lot of effort in developing their staff, but that means that they then are left without those resources. So we've sort of answered that call in that way. And we have adjusted our grant making practices. That will be launched in full at the end of this year, but definitely looking at reducing the amount of reporting that's needed, reducing the redundancy in our applications themselves. We ask the same question, a million different ways. And also recognizing that if we funded you before, there are certain things you shouldn't even have to answer because we have that information. And something as simple as that, because again, if the executive director is the person who's also writing the grants and is the person who's also doing all these other things, those moments add up, and just being respectful of the time that's required. Not having a lot of check-in throughout the life of that grant is we know most of these organizations at this point really well, but also being really intentional about how we onboard new organizations so that they can take advantage of our larger, more competitive grant pool. We know that smaller organizations for whom grant writing might be new, they still have needs. And if we can onboard them through our small grants program or some other way where they can get some funding, it's usually around $10,000 from us, but at the same time, then take advantage of some of the offerings that we have at CNE, the Center for Nonprofit Education, so that they are prepared to be competitive in those larger pools of funds. That's the one thing I've been most excited about. I am the senior director for the Fund for Women and Girls at the foundation, and we've had a small grants program with my fund for a number of years, but we're excited to sort of launch that foundation wide and to not gatekeep with our CEO grants as much as we did. Even though I don't think that was ever the intention, but that ultimately is what happens, because the folks who know are the ones who have access to that. So making sure that we're being very transparent about all of the streams of funds that are available to grantee partners.
LaTanya, I want to stay with you for a moment and sort of bring in this next question, because there's something that you alluded to, and I'm curious, certainly between you and Lee, and that's around sort of the way that Resilia support and certainly how we do it. What impact has it had on you as a program officer, right? And certainly, you know, your own administrative wingspan. Can you talk a little bit about that? And Lee, it'd be great if you can chime in as well.
So one of the things, you know, as I mentioned, I used to be a CEO of an organization, and I've been with the foundation now for a year, meaning I've been in philanthropy for a year. And one of the things that drew me here was my interest in being able to provide this kind of capacity building support. Everybody wants funding, absolutely, and I wanted to be a part of that, but also knowing what it would have meant to me to be able to have a program officer that who would understand my unique, maybe somewhat unique challenges. And so for my role, what this has meant is that board development support that is so needed, being able to make that available to our grantee partners. That's one of the things that they screamed about the most, was the idea that in their one-to-one coaching, being able to ask for the staff from Resilia to participate in board meetings and help educate the board themselves. It's been great for me in terms of my development as a philanthropy professional, and the training and development that we've had on I think a quarterly basis, to be in a space with other professionals like myself, having the same conversation about access and equity, and learning from what other people are doing. That has been extremely helpful. And being a part of the Slack community. I don't often actively participate. I tend to be a silent troll and listen and read what the other responses are, but that, you know, that in it, I mean, that has just been worth its weight in gold. And I think being able to understand more deeply what the needs of our grantee partners are. Resilia provides this quarterly feedback from the work with our partners. We get to really hear in great detail, in ways that we may or may not have been able to do otherwise, what their needs are, and really think about how we can respond to that in a really meaningful way.
Thank you. It's just, as you were sort of sharing that again, and going back to my sort of recovering program officer time, and just trying to, my deep commitment to my community partners, and certainly sort of the weight that I would carry would be a challenge, I think, sometimes. Lee, curious from your perspective, right, that what has this meant for you and your colleagues, just from your position of sort of how you engage and work with your nonprofits, and even if you want to share, even to LaTanya's point, being in a learning and action network, and what you're able to get out of it as well.
Yeah, so I'd like to credit one of my colleagues on the program team here at the Boston Foundation, who pointed something out to me, that much of capacity building and technical assistance, for as long as it's existed in that way, has been developed through kind of the Western and white-centric leadership style, an emphasis on hierarchy, an emphasis on approaches that align with that. And so organizations, nonprofits, have really had to assimilate into those systems and structures, and kind of the way of doing things, right? And I think where Resilia starts to get at dismantling that is really acknowledging the inherent power in the leadership at these organizations, and really kind of the nimbleness with how they've done the work. They've been doing the work, and being able to create an environment with coaches where organizations can say, yep, we know what we need here. We need the support, we need the capacity, the time to do it. And being able to connect on their own terms and their own time, I think, is really powerful and different than how I've seen other capacity building opportunities play out. So I just think sometimes the setup of Resilia begins to dismantle some of the old ways of doing things. I also think too, it has really helped in an indirect way, me get to know organizations and get to know kind of, again, those broader themes of what they're grappling with, what opportunities exist for those organizations without me having to survey organizations, right? Like there's a place for that, but I'm always grappling with like, geez, I don't want to over survey people. I don't want to kind of extract information. So being able to think about kind of the relationships that now these leaders are forging with their coaches, and then being able to get aggregate and anonymized and sometimes direct information about what organizations are working on is great information for us as we continue to shape our grant making more broadly in our programs. But I would say it also kind of creates a call to action, right, on our end, because, you know, if we think about organizations really seeking to build those donor stewardship programs, build individual giving programs, well, then what am I doing on my end to connect organizations to donor advised fund holders, for example, to my wonderful colleagues who are engaging with donors on a consistent basis? What am I doing to advocate and elevate organizations internally at the foundation to other foundation colleagues? So I think that just the information that I'm able to get without being in the room, because I don't need to be in the room, is incredibly helpful and informative.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Lee, thank you. You know, that power dynamic, I know we talk about it, we'll have conferences about it and the like. It's really, really important because these are the folks who are closest to the work. It's their work, right? We are investors, right? And them, but it's their knowledge, right? It's their expertise. So when they come to us, it's like, I know how to do the thing that I do. What I need help is on accounting. What I need help is on my marketing and communications. If you could help me with that, then I can do that thing that people in the community trust me to do a lot better with less headache. Not no headache, but with less headache, right? Jason, I want to bring you in as well. You know, your participation, and thank you again. I mean, I really appreciated the way that you have shown up for Elevate, but can you talk about just from your own perspective and the foundation's perspective, what you are able to get out of a learning and action network?
Yeah, just that word around learning, looking at best practice. We know that here we've tried some innovative things, but we haven't solved anything really. I think that we've done some things better, but just the learning around what some of those organizations and some of those partners across the country are doing and how that might be applied to some of the work that we're doing here has been critical. Even from today's conversation, I've taken notes about the BIPOC-led cohort and if that could be applied here locally so that we might be able to serve those organizations and foster some networking and collaborative conversations. So just an ongoing opportunity to have those conversations about what's working, what's not working, and to reevaluate and reshape some of those things that you may pilot that didn't work or that haven't worked so far has been incredibly beneficial to us in terms of Resilia and Elevate.
Jason, thank you. And let me just acknowledge something that you dropped. There was some knowledge that you dropped rather than I am picking up, and that is impact strategist as opposed to program officer. And I just want to acknowledge that because, you know, when I know I would go into the work, and I'm sure this may be the same for you, that like you really do care about the impact that can be had, right? That it's even bigger than a program, right? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives, right? Their outcomes, their opportunities with it. And I think when we sort of put it in the box of a program, I think we miss the humanity, right, of really what the work comes down to. So thank you, Jason. And for other folks in the room, a consideration for impact strategists. If you're going into some new strategic planning, you're wondering around sort of title changes, right? Thanks a lot, Jason. So I want to wrap this portion up because we want to spend some time opening it up to our audience today, but I want to go around the horn and just ask each of you the one piece of advice that you would have for your colleagues who are joining us today, who are attempting to strengthen their BIPOC-led serving grassroots organizations, their rural organizations. So I think with that, let me actually start with LaTanya. One piece of advice, LaTanya, that you can share to the folks.
Ask, listen, and act. Ask them what they need, listen to what they have to say, and then actually act on it.
So is that an ALA? Because I'm just thinking an acronym.
I guess so.
Okay. Okay. No,
Holla.
I really do like that. Yeah, I think, often we may ask, certainly we may listen. I think sometimes we might not hear what we want to hear when folks are really being honest. But I believe, a lot of us may struggle with the act part, right? What's that thing we can do? Thank you, LaTanya. Lee, one piece of advice that you would have for our community today.
Yeah, so sharing this out as advice to folks, but also to myself, and as we continue this work, I would say it's really about walking and chewing gum at the same time, in the sense that, yes, providing general operating support grants, multi-year, doubling down on those efforts, working on some of that repair work to earn trust and build relationships with BIPOC-led organizations and movement-based organizations, and connecting them to resources like Resilia, so that opportunity is available. But then it's also actually the internal work at the foundation that's actually going to set the stage to really help those organizations soar, right? So it's how am I creating more collaboration across my grant making team with my colleagues? How am I really thinking about drawing on the wisdom and centering the wisdom of colleagues who are actually more proximate than I am to communities that we're partnering with, that have those longstanding relationships. Many of my colleagues have been EDs of nonprofits and have worked on these issues for years. So how am I doing that internal networking, and how am I then making introductions, kind of fostering that internal work and that internal environment, something we're continuing to try to do, really sets the stage for organizations to get to know us better, and for us to be able to listen better. So.
Yeah, there's one thing that you mentioned that I think is just critically important, that you can do all the external work, right? But the credibility actually lies in the internal learning and the work and the change and the policy change and the practice change that happens inside, right? I'll also just add too, that is going to go a long way. And I think, Lee, you really said this, it's going to go a long way in people trusting you. And so, that reparations work, that's right, I'm using the word because that's exactly what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the need to repair, right? Relationships that, I was going to use the word damage, but frankly, we're never trusting to begin with, right? And so how do we actually bring folks along while also doing our own work as well? Thank you, Lee. And Jason, round out for you. One bit of advice that you can share for our family in the room today.
One bit of advice I would share is to lean into being a partner and not just a funder. We all get those emails where we're being invited to community events, or we're being invited to a roundtable to have a discussion about strategy for a particular organization. And that 10,000 foot view that we have the privilege of seeing from being in the philanthropic space and seeing different proposals and different things like that, not just locally, but nationally and around the country, some of that information can be invaluable to those that we are supporting. So what would it look like to walk alongside organizations in their journey in achieving their mission, growing their capacity as a partner, and not just the funder that here's the dollar to go do the 12-month grant, but what does true authentic community partnership look like in philanthropy? And that would be my encouragement.
That Jason, once again, picking up what you're putting down, sir. It's that, trust is sort of really embedded. Like, folks may be familiar with Stephen Covey's work around, the speed of trust, right? That like we really may not progress. We cannot progress if there is not trust centered in how we do it. And trust is built by engaging folks, by being vulnerable even. And yes, having to listen, right? And then again, I want to go back to LaTanya's point, and then act from that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. It just, folks, we talked a lot about, our Elevate space. And so if folks are interested to learn more about Elevate, my email address is certainly up on the screen. I welcome you to certainly reach out and find out more. Now we want to open it up to the beloved community that we have with us today. And so, again, I want to continue to invite LaTanya, Lee, and Jason into our conversation. But a couple questions that I want to certainly pose. What from today's discussion has resonated the most with you, and in particular, your experience? Another question to consider is, what capacity building strategies have you and your foundation deployed to strengthen BIPOC-led and serving grassroots organizations? And I recognize the wide diversity of funders that we have in the room. So also for those who support rural communities as well, what have been sort of, those practices that you've tried to advance? And then lastly, what might be some key pieces to take away from today's conversation, and spend some time opening up. And so please feel free to unmute your mic. If you feel so bold, you can turn your camera on as well. But we really do want to hear from you. What's your experience? What are you hearing in today's conversation that really sort of sits with you?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm currently in Tucson, Arizona, around the nonprofit community. And I think Jason's last point really struck the idea of community-centric work. Community-centric's been used in fundraising a lot lately, but just the idea of having community voices at the table for discussions, for decision-making, for everything. I think there's, over the years, I've been in nonprofits coast to coast, and there's always seems to be this gap in who's being asked, who's being heard, who's being listened to. And so to hear that be a focal point of this work is really exciting. I'm new to Resilia. This is my first webinar, so I'm really excited that these conversations are happening on a scale that I'm not quite tapped into yet. There's like a gap on the geographic map when I saw where Resilia is doing all the work. So it's exciting to be a part of this conversation and driving this BIPOC.
Oh, wait, did we lose Elizabeth? I feel like I'm on like MSNBC or CNN now, where like you do like the Zoom thing, and then like and then one of your panelists phrases. But Elizabeth, I know you probably joined one. Love Tucson, so I had to put up the virtual background the last time I was in Tucson. It was a couple years ago. But this point around listening is critically important. I think there is a tendency to convene, community, right? And certainly set up 3 microphones around the room and have folks talk. But it can be a challenge, I think, to then act upon that, right? Thank you, Elizabeth. Other folks, I'm curious around, and particularly for the other funders in the room, your particular approaches to infrastructure or capacity support. How are you advancing this work? What are some of the questions that you might be even asking yourself about capacity building support?
Can I jump in on the last point just briefly? We have actually started to make a really intentional effort about making sure that in terms of listening, we're listening to those that are traditionally not being asked. We found ourselves in a situation where we were asking the exact same people for the last 10 years the questions around community engagement, what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And not to say that those individuals weren't well informed, but may be missing an opportunity to be informed by some of those that no one talks to. We likened it to, the homeowner that sits on the corner and makes sure all the kids gets on the school bus. Who's having a conversation about what's going on in community with that individual? So how we can be intentional about going out and identifying folks that are not already at the table every time we have a listening session.
Jason, so yeah, I mean, should just wear a t-shirt that says, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It is usually within our communities of color, there has often been a designated leader, right? Not necessarily designated by the community, but designated by power. It says, well, we will talk to that individual or maybe this organization because we have identified them as the sole voice of a community. That is not, that hasn't played out well over the past 50 years for communities of color, right? That in fact, the leadership within communities of color is diverse. It's not just one person, it's multiple individuals, right? And Jason, what I also hear you saying too is that we end up skipping over those folks who are going to be very honest.
Yeah.
Right. And that is, look, the work that we do, for many of us, it's personal. And so when there is, dissatisfaction, I'm being very euphemistic with the word right now, but when there's dissatisfaction and how we as a funder may show up, I think sometimes we internalize that ourselves and then say, you know what, I'd rather not get cursed out right now, right? But sorry, discomfort is something that you lean into, right? Yeah. That like you embrace. And so that way you can come through the other side, right, of it. Thank you, Jason. Folks, just within the last few minutes that we have, I want to hear from other folks too. Anything beyond, certainly your own practices that is resonating with you from what Jason, Latanya, Lee have shared? And I also want to take an opportunity to introduce my awesome colleagues from Resilia, who themselves have gone through the trials and tribulations of either being grant makers or nonprofit executives. And certainly I want to invite them in to share some of their thoughts as well.
So this is Allison Brody. I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia. I kind of didn't agree with who they said was the traditional thing because I've always heard Mattaponi, and the Mattaponi tribe just got federal designation after these many years, even though Matoka was a Mattaponi. So we'll have to write those folks and just make sure.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah. Thank you.
But one of the things that I do both our capacity building work and our communications work at the foundation is that identification of the right people to talk to in any group or groups and how to reach them is an incredible challenge, no matter what community you're in my experience. Like right now, we're trying to communicate. We're small health centric foundation, about Medicaid unwinding. Well, we don't know exactly who we should, we're working. So if you're trying to put together, a cohort of people of color, which we are, and we've been, trying to figure this out for 2 years, we've decided to start with the NAACP here and talk to them, like, hey, let's work together. You might be better able to identify, but most people are getting communication here. They're not reading one newspaper. They're not listening to one radio station. They're not all going to the same church or the same temple, unless you only have one, like in our town, one temple. That's easy. But still, I mean, it's just, so how have people sort of overcome this challenge of trying to not only identify, but then connect effectively with any individual group, or, in our case, dig down a couple of levels to be sure we're really capturing the people who should be in our group. It's hard.
It is.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I know who the obvious people are. Oh, contact this pastor, or contact, this former leader of X, but I know that's not sufficient.
Allison, thank you for that. I'm curious with Lee, LaTanya, and Jason, certainly anyone else in the room, when you are thinking about your constituency engagement, right? What are some of the steps that you will take to identify? Because I think, Allison, but it sounds like you're also trying to identify who the most credible messengers within the community who can receive this information and then educate, right, their own particular constituents. I'm curious between, LaTanya.
I think it's sort of, pulling back the onion, right? So you start with the core, perhaps, or that and you ask them, who else should we be talking to? Literally, that is what there was a particular issue that we wanted to address at the foundation, and we knew some people, so we started with those folks. And in every conversation, it was, who else should we be talking to? And then we went and talked to those folks and asked the same question. And yes, that takes time. But I think the other part of that is something I believe that Jason said, which is being a real partner. That means going out and when you're called to come and to speak or to come observe or participate, show up, because a lot of times those folks that you may not otherwise have relationships with might be present in those spaces, and you can learn who those players are there. I think when we are new to this, that's natural for us. I'm new to this. I don't live where I work. So those were the things that I knew I had to do. I think we have to sort of exercise that muscle when we've been doing it for a while and think that we do know the landscape, or when we're of that community and we think we know the landscape. The landscape is dynamic. It is constantly changing. And we have to be a part of that to understand what the ebbs and flows and who the new players in that space are.
Thank you. Grace, I could see your hand up because I see that you are saying exactly what LaTanya just lifted up.
Yeah, I am echoing her sentiments, but also have a different question, if it's appropriate to ask that now.
Yeah, go on.
Something that we have been, so we're in the first year of our formal capacity building program at United Way of Olmsted County, which is in Southeast Minnesota. But one thing that we've been talking about a lot as we think about what is the next iteration of this type of work is, how do we work to position the folks that receive capacity building services or opportunities? How do we work to position them to be capacity builders? We see a lot in our community that our capacity builders are white-led mainstream organizations. And I'm just really interested in what is that next layer of, once folks have got some capacity built, how can they be the capacity builders, especially because I'd like to see some capacity builders of color to be able to work with folks that run agencies like them and within their particular communities of color. One thing that we have been thinking about is partnering with some other folks in our community to do some sort of mentoring opportunity. And that is as far as we've gotten on thinking through those ideas. So I'd just be curious in the last couple of minutes if anyone else has been thinking that way and what you've been working on.
Well, I'll go to a simple one, partner with Resilia, and you'll get all that certainly resolved. But again, back to the panelists. Given what Grace is saying, I mean, what's coming to mind for you?
We have not gotten this approved yet, but one of the things that we are pitching, that I am pitching to our team, is that concept around participatory grant making and having that cohort that is built capacity inform the next cycle of grants as they go out into community with capacity building support. So making and informing on those grant decisions that go into community. And if there are gaps in a proposal where an organization may need some back office support to do this work or some capacity building to do this work, then it's provided by those individuals in the cohort. Again, I'm not sure how the board's going to feel about that. but a concept that we hope to explore.
Hey, look, you know what? Begin the board education now. They will eventually get there. I think, and particularly from a board's perspective, though, and just kind of keeping it real, they are stewards of the finances and resources of the foundation. And so ultimately, their top priority should be, are we maximizing our investments, right? And that shows up not just in the ability of an organization or a nonprofit to do its particular work, but also the health of that organization too, right? Wow. Folks, I want to just sort of wrap this up. Thank you all for your voice, your also thoughtful nature. Elizabeth, thank you too for having one of those moments to just kind of just let us know around sort of how vast really, this conversation needs to be. So a couple of things that I'm taking away. One, meeting time-constrained nonprofits where they are, right? So nonprofits don't have the capacity to build capacity. Thank you, Jason, for that. And so just when you consider certainly the work that we do here at Resilia, bite-sized trainings in light of this fact, meeting nonprofits ultimately where they are. And so when I think about Health Forward and certainly Fairfield County, saying that Resilia, is used at your own pace type of platform, right? And that's what we really mean by meeting people where they are, not sort of forcing them, right, to do something when we want them to do it, right? It's really around sort of when they have the time. Reimagining capacity building, right? And so much of capacity building in TA has been developed through Western or white-centered leadership style. Thank you, Lee, in talking about sort of how white-dominant culture, and again, we're not talking about white people, we're talking about the concept of whiteness and certainly how that shows up, that it will drive folks to even mission creep, right? From their real deep intention of what their work should be. And lastly, I love this. Allah, and thank you again, Elizabeth, for that, because it is Spanish for wings, right? Ask, listen, and then more importantly, act. There is nothing more frustrating to me, a member of community, showing up to a town hall, exposing yourself, being vulnerable, believing that someone is going to actually take your words and turning into action and nothing happens, right? That's typical, right? So we really do have an opportunity to do something different. We are at time. I want to thank Lee, LaTanya, Jason for certainly contributing their voices today. Allison, thank you as well. Elizabeth, Grace, and everyone else. Really thank you for your time. Also want to thank Sasha and Don on our team for once again being some of the smartest people I've ever had the fortune of working with and really sort of set this up. And lastly, Claire, Tanya, and the folks at Peak. You are a mighty organization that does amazing work, and I've been a fan for a really long time. Hi, Kate. I see you too. Great, folks. Have a great rest of your day, and there will be a recording of this that will be shared out as well. Thank you all.
Thank you.